Good evening. Let's try it again. Good evening. Okay, welcome. So hopefully this is not it. Hopefully we're going to have more people here. I know there's some who told me they were coming, so I trust that they're still on their way. So want to give everybody a wonderful welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight. This is my friend Karl. Bow our heads for prayer now. Father, we thank you for bringing us here tonight. Those who might still be traveling, we ask that you would give them safe traveling mercies, that you would watch over them, protect them. But as we're here tonight, we pray for a special blessing. We are here. We're here to learn about our history, but in learning about our history, we want to make sure we learn more about you. And so we pray that even as we learn about history, that Jesus will be the center and that Jesus will be uplifted. We pray for your Holy Spirit to be here, that you would touch Karl and speak through him in a special way. And Lord, please inspire us to a greater confidence in you and in your leading. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, let me just say a few words of introduction about Karl. I know some of you have already heard some things about him that I've said before, but my friend Karl, he was born and raised in the Seventh-Day Adventist Church, and then in the mid-1970s, what year? Around 75, 76, he decided to run from God and get as far away from the Adventist church as he could get. And he spent 22 years out in the world. And then in the mid-90s, one of his co-workers told him about a local pastor there in Phoenix who was a former Adventist and who had a special ministry to lead people out of the Seventh-day Adventist church. Some of you see his magazine Proclamation. And so they gave this former Adventist minister's material to Karl, and he says, I'll see what they've got to say. I grew up Adventist. I know a little something about it. And the more he looked at the things they were accusing us of, the more he felt impressed to compare what they were saying with what the Bible said, and also with what we ourselves say. And time again, he kept finding how everything they were accusing us of was a pack of lies. And so it was through studying this anti-Adventist material that God brought him back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, where he has been since 1998. And he has a special ministry of apologetics, which means that's a technical term for the defense of the faith. And so he's going to talk to us this weekend, a series he has never done before. So we will be the first audience to get to hear these presentations on Adventist history, with an emphasis on how this church has been attacked over the years by various offshoots and dissident groups, and how God has helped us to answer their charges. So, Karl, the time is yours. We will have a handout here, a chart that he has. I don't know if he'll ask me to pass it out, or you can just come get it later.
About it. Okay, is my microphone hot? Yeah, I'm hot, just like Memorex. All right, I do have a chart. Boy, I'm real hot. I do have a chart. Part of my journey back into the church was studying Adventist history. My actual study began in the mid-'80s as I began to study the Adventist church. I understood the doctrines a bit as I began to study, and I was studying the doctrines, and the text that rang in my head was, by beholding you become. And then I was thinking about how we became a people. I said, listen, if the Adventist church really was called by God, we really were raised up by God to give a mission and message at this time in Earth's history. If that's true, we were called in place and time. And if we were called in place and time, we should know our history. And so I started studying Adventist history. And so it was a basic two-pronged approach: Adventist doctrine and Adventist history. And that went on for a little while. I moved from Ohio to Phoenix, Arizona in '93. I was in that time, I was in the photography business. I'd done all kinds of things: photographer, darkroom technician, sold cameras, all that stuff. And as I was selling the cameras, I was working with a young lady, as Ethan mentioned, who said her pastor was a former Adventist. And this sparked some interest, and so I had went over to his church. This was about 1996, that I went over to his church and picked up some audio tapes he did and a little booklet he did against Ellen White, and started to study this, assimilate this material. And I maybe had a total of 80 books in my library, but that were you would call religious books. And so as I began to study this material, and a lot of it was Ellen White apologetics, not just Adventists, mainly Ellen White, I said, well, I got to have the material. So I started going to the ABC to buy the books. So I had the other material. I worked out this premise: however thin you make a pancake, it always has two sides. And I heard his side. I got to get the material to read and check and see what the other side was. There's always another question coming in. And so I began to study this and go buy books. And over the years, my library has grown. I have an addiction to books to which I'm not looking for the cure. I have about 4,000 books now. And that's a lot, but we have other people in our denomination, like H.M.S. Richards Sr., when he passed away, had over 20,000 books in his library. So I'm just a beginner. But I'm working on it. And so as I begin to develop this, understanding what the critics... So now I'm three-pronged is what I'm doing. I'm Adventist doctrine, Adventist history, and now apologetics. Principally Ellen White apologetics, some general Adventist apologetics, defense of the faith. And actually, it began to move me back into the church. And not that I had every question answered, but it's the weight of the material. You know what I mean? Even Ellen White makes a comment. We may not have all the answers, but we know where the tendency is. And I remembered something Mark said. In fact, when I ended up working at the Adventist Book Center in the conference office, J. Mark Martin, the former Adventist that I'm mentioning, would send flowers once a year on his anniversary of when he left the Adventist church. And these weren't cheap flowers. They were very expensive, very nice. I've seen them come in. And I thought, well, maybe I should send him flowers to thank him for bringing me back into the church. Now, I only thought about that because I can't afford flowers to send him. But it just goes to show you, I have met Mark over the years. The other one that Ethan mentioned was Dale Ratzlaff, who would start the magazine Proclamation. And I met him via his book, Cultic Doctrine of Seventh-Day Adventist, which was his book against our sanctuary doctrine. And I had written him a letter only to find out that he wasn't living in Sedona, Arizona, north of me, about 70, 80 miles, or maybe 100 miles, really, technically, but that he was just down the street from me. So I went over to his house, met him, and bought a photocopy book of Dudley M. Kenwright on the life of Mrs. White, the false prophet. Anybody familiar with Dudley Kenwright? Okay, a couple hands go up. And this is what I mean about when we talk about Adventist history. Things that are important to know in our history, because when we don't know our history and we don't have a good understanding of our doctrine, I don't mean we have to be theologians. It's easy for people to come in and get us sidetracked into other issues that we think is going the right way. That's what happens with some of these dissonant movements. And this was part of my work. And you can collect these after you go. Anybody interested can take a chart. And this was just an exercise for me to see the different groups that had come off of the church, out of the Millerite movement, from the Millerite movement. And we can see that it's quite ornate here. And so there's just gives us an idea about what's going on out there. And so if you're interested in these, then come on up and get them afterwards. And I've spoken on all these things over the years. This particular set of series is new. I've just put this all together, so I might be a little stiff on some places. It's not as smooth, especially when I got the invitation, and then I had to really start working on it. And then he calls up and says, hey, you're coming 2 weeks earlier. So I have 2 weeks less to work on it. So I figured, well, if you know me, I make up what I don't know, so I'll just... But what I'm going to present here over these next meeting, these presentations, is not necessarily just a dissertation about what's wrong with these groups. You know, we can talk negative and critical about these people, and that's generally what they talk about us, you know, critically about the Adventist church. The seeds that drove these people to do this thing, these offshoots and these dissonant movements, the seeds that drive this are within all of us. Right now, right here tonight. You can start your own thing. And not necessarily that you have to start your own church, but you start your own dissidence. You have your own mindset. And when people aren't following your way of what you think Adventism should be, you build up these walls. And you march to a different path. And people realize that around you. And that creates dissidence and disunity in the church. Now, I'm not saying we all have to sing out of the same hymnal every time. We're all different people, and it's okay to have different ideas about things. It really is. And I'm not against a good, honest, friendly tussle among brothers and sisters. Sometimes we have to struggle with these things. It's okay. It doesn't make us enemies. We don't have to make them the bad guy. And that's the same for these groups as I talk about them, especially when we talk about groups within the church, such as the Desmond Ford issue. I actually like Desmond Ford. I don't have to make him the bad guy. But there are questions we need to ask about what happened and where we are today with that, so we have a clear picture about who we are and where we're going. This church was raised up at a certain time in Earth's history with a special message to give to the world about Christ's coming. We are giving the gospel message in the context of the last days to the world to enlarge the kingdom of Christ. We are bringing people into the covenant. If you look at Revelation 14, after the three angels' messages, we have the one like the Son of Man appearing on the clouds of heaven and the two harvests. What that means is there's nothing more after the three angels' messages. Nothing more to be done. This is the last message. And he called us to give this message. He didn't call the pastors to give it so we can come in each Sabbath and sit and listen to a sermon. He called you. That's why you're a Seventh-Day Adventist. Not because of the Sabbath. You know that? You may have become an Adventist because you accepted the Sabbath, but that's not a good enough reason to be a Seventh-Day Adventist. You know that? I mean, if you were convinced on just the Sabbath, you could be a Seventh-Day Baptist, right? You can still keep Sabbath. Why a Seventh-Day Adventist? Because we have a mission. That mission is in the three angels' messages. That mission is the last message of hope to go into the world. And you were commissioned to give it. How are you giving it? What is your ministry? Ethan is the pastor of this church, but you are the ministers. What is your ministry? How are you sharing the gospel and love of Christ? Your co-workers, friends, family, do they see it in you? You know, I worked 13 years part-time in the ABC there at the conference office. I saw that as a ministry. It certainly wasn't about the money. God knows it wasn't about the money. And when he took me out of that, when I had to go find other work, and then especially to go into a secular job out of the conference office, I felt that after my 22-year sojourn into the world, and that I was finally doing something with the church and hoping that God was leading me, here I felt like I was going backwards. But in this office of 7 people, that I sit in front of a computer all day, very boring job, 7 people who don't know Christ. A Polish lady who is all practicality an atheist says that I'm the only one that can talk to her about God. The only place that she can hear about God. Now, why is that? We all have this ministry to do. And when we see these groups come in, that we're going to start with tonight, what they do is they distract us and move us away from what God has called us to be. More so than just the doctrines that they're teaching, to say that this doctrine is wrong for this reason or that reason. But when it takes us away from what God raised this church up to be, flags should be going up, and we should be on the lookout. Unfortunately, they can come in and get us when we're weak and vulnerable. They get us because we might be a new member. Anybody here a brand new member? We're all kind of seasoned members here. Because new members, you know how new members are. The babies are really hot, right? They're ready to go. They're on fire. They don't know a lot. And they're easy pickings. These groups can come in and get them. Or maybe you've been around the church a while, and you might have noticed your brother and sisters are maybe not as hot as they should be, and you want to do something, and then you meet some of these people, and they seem to be pious Christians who got something to offer, and next thing you know, you're caught up into some whirlwind of what they're involved in. And you think you're going along the road of piety when really you're being taken away from God's mission for this church. We can be very busy and active doing what we think is God's work when in fact it's not God's work at all. And I hope we see some of that in this. And it's not just, like I said, to talk about these groups in a negative way, but to help shed light on the same problem that exists today that caused these movements to begin in the first place. I know in the Reformation, Martin Luther, who was very vocal in calling the Pope Antichrist, said that the Antichrist he feared the most was self-Pope. When you look in the mirror, is the one you got to really question. And so I don't want us to just be on an us-them basis, because that seems to be the problem. We set up this dissident, us and them. And it's not us and them. Tonight we're going to talk about the Church of God Adventists. How many have heard of the Church of God Adventists? You may have read a little bit about them when you read some stuff from Ellen White, but not really realize how they kind of got started. If I can point it to the right, there we go. Well, they're organized, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The main body is organized in Denver, Colorado, as the Church of God Seventh-Day, as they spell out the word seventh. When they organized initially, they were the Church of God Adventists, because they were an Adventist group that had come out, and you'll see it on the chart. And they were a group that came out of the Adventist church, what would be the Sabbatarian Adventists, in a dissidence over Ellen White and over the name of the church. But different groups, and there you go. It's me pushing the wrong buttons. So you have one little group that uses the number seventh for Seventh Day. That's usually the Salem group or some of the independent churches will write the number 7 rather than spell it out. And then you have other various independent groups. Well, not every time you see the word Church of God is it this Church of God. And this is the confusing part of the name Church of God. One of the reasons why Ellen White says we shouldn't be called the Church of God when we organized because it's confusing. There are a lot of Church of Gods out there. Coming out of the Millerite Movement, breaking right off of the main group, was the Church of God of Abrahamic faith. Had nothing to do with Church of God Adventists. They're Sunday keepers, Church of God Abrahamic faith. There's the Pentecostal Church, Church of God Holiness. Their Sunday group, Pentecostals, are just like whether they're Assemblies of God or whoever they are. So there's different Church of Gods. And that's the confusion. You know, and that's why Ellen White says we shouldn't be called that, because it's not specific. You know, but they said the only name that could be called was Church of God. This is a man here named Richard Nichols, and I've communicated with him over the years. If I seem a little tired, I was up at 1 o'clock this morning, my time, and it's been quite an interesting day. So please. Nichols, I've communicated with him. He's passed on now. He's passed away. But he was a part of the Worldwide Church of God, the group that was started by Armstrong. But he was helping to organize communication between the various Church of Gods through what they called the Sabbath Association, and the resource material and things of that nature to promote the Sabbath and become a central area. In fact, he even wrote a little book on the history of the Church of God, beginning right from the break-off from the Adventist Church on into what would become his group, Worldwide Church of God. And he notes in his own biography, in his own writing, the main sections, the main things that was the problem that they had with Seventh-day Adventists. Even currently, this is still contemporary today. He says the visions and writings of Ellen White are held by SDAs as divinely inspired. He says, I cannot accept this because the visions are often self-contradictory and against the Scriptures. He says, referring to Adventists, believe that the writings of Mrs. White are the testimony of Jesus and the spirit of prophecy, Revelation 19:10, and as such are equal with Bible. So you can see he has had some misnomers about the work and ministry of Ellen White, but this is the problem that he has with her. Secondly, Ellen White had a vision that told her that the Sabbath Adventist should be called Seventh-Day Adventist. That's exactly how he wrote it. We spell it with the hyphen and the lowercase d. But exactly how he wrote it in the book was with the capital D. He says, and that to use the term Church of God would be to excite suspicion, conceal absurd errors, and be a mark of fanaticism. And this lays at the heart of the dissidents that would move them away and create what would become Church of God, Adventist, and later Seventh-day. The main reason, however, really wasn't over Ellen White's gift, and less over the name, but had to do with the fact that they were promoting a theology called the age to come. You familiar with that? The age to come? Anybody heard of that? I've got one person. I have two, three. Excuse me? Your Worldwide Church of God? Okay, then here, we'll there you go. Well, you help fill in where I have because putting these together is not so much what I'm saying, it's what to leave out. I mean, because you could make 6 presentations out of any of these things. Well, there you go. You got to say something for them Baptists. The age to come. Now, in Adventist theology, we talk about the 1,000 years, right? Where do we spend 1,000 years? Right? Anybody who's an Adventist didn't understand that before? Is that new to you? That's been Adventist theology the whole time. But the age to come puts the millennium here on earth. That's not the only problem. That's nothing compared to what the problem was. The problem is during the reign of Christ, people have a chance to be saved, a second chance. And that's error. That's the age to come. And this was the principal doctrine that began to move this group. And I think that the others that they used, the name of the church and Ellen White, were smokescreens as their excuses to move away from the Adventist body at that time, as we were beginning to organize into a denomination to carry the mission forward. Now, you know why we organized into a denomination. We didn't want to be just another church. In fact, we technically aren't a denomination just for the sake of being a denomination. But if we're going to organize the work, we had to organize a church. Because the only other option is what? Disorganization. We don't want that. So we're really a movement. However, unfortunately, many of us have settled down to denominationalism, right? And I'm talking us corporately Adventists across the world. We've kind of settled down to do church, right? We do church. Come every week, we do it. Do church, go home, feel good. Yeah? But that's not what we were called for. We're called for something different. And so this lays at the heart then of this group. It really started to form, as Nichols points out, the messenger party. Ellen White talks about this. We see this in Arthur White's biography, Volume 1 of the 6-volume biography series. We see this in Volume 1 of the Testimonies, Ellen White's Testimonies. And you can kind of read up on some of these pieces, these stories, about how it began. The messenger party was important in that it brought to the front, to the fore, the two key issues which created the division. Ellen White, name of the church. That was the main thing. So this is old history. That's still with us today. That's still what they're teaching. It hasn't changed. The song hasn't changed. It's still the same song. The messenger party began publishing what they call the Messenger of Truth out of Jackson, Michigan. And some sources have said 53. Most sources seem to be liable that was the fall of 54, that when the paper or magazine began to be produced. I just put that there for the sake of clarity. We're just talking about them in general. It's not like we had to be that exact, but I like to kind of be at least in the neighborhood. So I think, there will be a test. So this 54 seems to be the better date, but some of the sources I've read use the 53. And I like the 54 date better because they match some of the stories of Ellen White, how she talked, matches better with 54, and then that parallels some of the other stories that have been published in the review, and those two things parallel together, which seem to suggest 54 is the better date. You know, not just because Ellen White said it, but she said it as a person who was on the ground in the history of it as it was happening. And we see it in the review, and that's why I think 54 is probably a better date. While Ellen White was in Oswego, New York, June of 53, she was showing the people of God were weighed down with clogs, that there had been Achans in the camp. Now, we hear this also from all the dissident groups. I don't care who the offshoots are. The Adventist church has moved away from the truth. We've relaxed. We've this and that. This has been the problem of God's people from the very beginning. It hasn't changed. And what's going to happen if you and I get together and we want to do it better and we go and organize a group? What's going to happen? The same thing. You know, it's like the families who move out of the city because of crime. And so they all pack up and move up to the country. And what I say is, wherever you go, there you are. You take it right with you, right? Right there it is. Because people are there. So how many organizations are we going to have before we finally get it right? It's absurd, isn't it? God works with his church, defective as it is. It's the apple of his eye. He will work with his church. Listen, you think about the Adventist church and what we've done as God's calling. I would say we've done more to fulfill our calling in God's mission for us than the Jewish people did over a 1,500-year period. Yet God was patient with them. He didn't have a calling out, did he? Did he say, listen, I'm going to have a new movement start. It's called the Davidians of Israelites. Did he do that? No. He bore patiently with them. They were his people. And you know what? They're still his people. Even Paul, writing in the book of Romans, to the Jew first, and then to the Gentile. they're still important to God. You know? And so we need to realize that. Problems were in the church from the beginning. Revival and reformation was always needed. Where does it begin? Reformation always begins with you. Too often people are looking out and they want reformation to begin out there and tell you you've got to reform. But you got to begin with you. And as each of us begin to reform, that's revival. That's how it catches and goes and blazes across the church. Not out accusing other people and pointing fingers. We have to begin with ourselves. The messenger party, which is interesting, we call it the messenger party. Loughborough was big on that in his biographies, his history, the rise and progress of Seventh-Day Adventist, and then the re-edited edition in 1905, the Great Second Advent Movement. Nichols, in his book, refers to the Sabbatarian Adventists with Ellen White as the White Party. I think he does this a little facetiously, a little on purpose, just to kind of like back at you, instead of just referring you, because we refer to them as the messenger party, not the Church of God or some group like that. And so the messenger party, the Seventh-day Adventist message was brought to Wisconsin in 51 by H.S. Case, and the first groups were organized. J.H., John Harvey Wagner, and Waterman Phelps soon began ministries in southern Wisconsin. J.H. Wagner, anybody know that name? Big name in Adventist history. He was the father of Elliot J. Wagner of 1888 fame. John Harvey came into the Adventist movement circa 1851. He came in being a full convert, not being a part of the Millerite Movement, not being a part of the original program, the Advent cause. This really floored everybody because they thought that only those who they were going to minister to in the beginning during what's called the scattering time had been former Adventists, former Millerites. And here we have a man who's accepting the message for the first time. This was the beginning. 1851 was the beginning of what we call the gathering time, when the church began to gather in and to grow. Shortly after that, 1852, is when James and Ellen White get the hand press that's bought with money that's loaned by Hiram Edson. His wife sold some silverware, get the money. That's back when the silverware was silver. And so they had the hand press, and they rented the houses north of there up into Rochester, New York, and started printing their paper themselves, 1852 to 55, before they come to Battle Creek. So this was all right at the heart of us growing as a church. And Case would become a Church of God member. And Wagner would have to then deal with these people in the messenger party. But they would be picking up this age to come theology. In 53, Case and Russell, the first dissenters to arise from the emerging Adventist called Adventist Church, 7 years before the first local conferences were organized in 61, made two charges against the Whites. One, that they were getting rich off the church paper, and two, that Ellen White was being placed above the Bible. Offended at Mrs. White's counsel directed at them, they launched a new paper, Messenger of Truth, in 54. Here's the 54 date. This is Herb Douglas, Messenger of the Lord, to supplant the Review and Herald. Now the thing here, the Whites were being charged of making money. James White had bought some Bibles back east, and he was being accused of making profit off the Bibles that he sold. Now I'm an old carpet salesman. I've been in sales. Anybody here in sales? Is profit a bad word? No. But the point is that the Bibles he was selling, he was actually selling at or below cost at the time, just to get Bibles to these people. So it really wasn't a profit venture. And then, of course, Ellen White was being placed above Bible. Now, we know that Ellen White this was not her doing, if there was anything happening like that. But again, it has to do with the agitation of spiritual gifts. And because the Russell and Case both had messages from Ellen White that were critical to them. They accept her at first, and then when they get a message that they need correction, all of a sudden she's a false prophet. June 53, the messenger party starts in Jackson, Michigan. Dan Palmer's wife had an incident. Dan Palmer sound familiar to anybody? When the Whites went to Michigan, they had a group of people who kind of helped them support their growth, their movement there. And that was Dan Palmer, there was Kellogg, and there was the Smith family. Not Uriah Smith family, but different Smith family. And these were the money backers that helped them move into Battle Creek, build the building, and get them the first steam press that they would have there. And so it really helped set them up. They had the offer to them over and against the offers that were coming out of Vermont at the time. And the offers from Vermont was actually better. They should have went to Vermont to plant the church. They had a better deal. But James said, no, Michigan is the new West. We want to be part of the growing country. We want to be right in the center of it. And so he chose Battle Creek. That's why they went to Michigan. And so here they are, Dan Palmer's wife, a part of the real beginnings of the Michigan setup, had an incident with the neighbor. Off guard, she called the lady a witch. Daughter of one of the church members overheard it, said that she had use the other word. Okay, so Case and Russell, they wanted her dealt with justly because So two of the brethren's assistants, she was guilty, should confess, and when James and Ellen White arrived, they found the church in dissension, all kinds of problems. And that's when Ellen White then had her vision. They arrived, all was in the Jackson Church meeting, the opening prayer, Ellen White went into vision, and she reproved Mrs. Palmer for her harsh treatment of the lady, but she couldn't remember everything else that had happened or what was said, so she didn't go and continue on. And immediately, the two accusing brethren, Case and Russell, were pleased when they heard that. And they rose and they expressed unbounded confidence in the visions as genuine manifestations. And they turned into Mrs. Palmer in a harsh and stern manner. They urged her to confess. And she remained quiet. And this is the kind of the heart that you have being manifested by these people. Harsh treatment against their brother. We had the annual council here recently dealing with the issue of unity. And because of some of the conferences, the Pacific Union maybe not going along the way they thought the GC thought they should go, one of the people there, very conservative person, immediately posted a blog and very sternly thought that immediately the PUC should be made a mission and punished for what they've done. Instantly. The spirit that caused this is the same spirit that exists today in some people. And so that's what we have to watch out for. Where is it? And it might show up in you. And if it does, be aware of it. We need to temper it. So they wanted her to confess. Next day, Ellen White was shown that Mrs. Palmer did not use the crude word. She didn't call her the other word. And so she justified the woman in that sense and was shown the unchristian spirit of Case and Russell, and she reproved them. And so with a few of the other dissidents, they were not happy. They went off and started their own little organization. And we see this time after time when people react negatively against criticism. And this is kind of like what happened. The mission of this sheet, J.N. Loughborough writes in his book, Great Second Advent Movement. I thought I put my phone on silence. The mission of this sheet, the messenger of truth, and its conductors seem to be to tear down and defame instead of to build up. That's probably the best statement in this paragraph. And that's something that should lead you to consider when you're looking at some of these other groups, and you might be wondering, do they have some truth? Are they really saying something I need to hear? And if they're being critical and tearing down, and it's an us and them, and you're bad, we're good, you can start thinking something's not right. Something's wrong there. No one is that pious. And anybody that gives you that kind of a pious front, you know is pretentious, right? You only wish you were that pious, right? And you know that something's not right. Be aware of it. You know, open up to that and ask them some questions. And that's what we see happening here. They were critical of the Adventist followers. Many falsehoods were inserted in its pages, which Ellen White, J.N. Loughborough and Ellen White both had mentioned, annoyed us in our work in the message. And it was, and as it was our first experience with such an open attack, we thought it our duty to refute their slanderous statements. We hadn't had this kind of experience before. And this was all at the beginning when we began to coalesce as a group, meet in the Battle Creek, and then would organize as a denomination. You'll see this kind of laid out on the chart at the beginning. In early 55, James and the Review and Herald were in serious financial trouble, possibly due to the influence of the Messenger Party. White was ill. He sought to free himself from the editorship of the paper, but there wasn't anybody to take his place. He jumped at the opportunity to move the paper to Battle Creek, where Adventist brethren agreed to finance the paper. That's Nichols' statement in his book on history of the Church of God, but he eliminates the Vermont story, and he only sees the part of the story he wants to see. And that was James White jumping to make money, jumping to get this taken care of. What was problem here? From the very beginning, when James began to write the paper, and if you understand the beginning of the review, it was the month that Edson White was born, July of 49, when they published the first edition of the paper. It's called Present Truth at that time. Had to do with the Sabbath. And they ran several editions, several volumes, and then they decided, James says, well, we should also then print and publish the review of the Advent, of the Millerite Movement, the review of the Advent. So it became the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, continued to herald the Sabbath. Hence the name was shortened to the Review and Herald. But this was the beginnings of the paper that was to go out. And James was always trying to find a way that the group could corporately take responsibility for this, that it wasn't always on his shoulders. It wasn't something he owned. It was supposed to be something we owned. And he couldn't find corporate responsibility, anyone to jump in with him to take control. So it wasn't like he was trying to be Mr. Control Freak, which, by the way, he was. He really was a control freak. And probably what the church needed at the time as we were beginning to grow. This was his baby that he really cherished. But he really wasn't looking to just be in control of the review and push everybody out. He was looking for people to come in and corporately run this thing. That's what he really wanted, because it was killing him. It was a lot of stress for him, having this on his shoulders. Nobody to take the place. So when they agreed to finance him, he stepped in. There was another group of boys, Stevenson and Hall, who were First-Day Adventists, and they had accepted the theory of the age to come, and they tried to see if they could get it into the review, but when that wouldn't work, they went and joined in with the Messenger Party, started writing against the review and creating other stories. So this thing began to grow and flourish, is what was happening. The Messenger Party, in 58, the Messenger Party split and scattered, and the Messenger ceased to exist. The hand press that was used to publish their paper now is used to publish a paper called The Hope of Israel, 1863 to 65, by Samuel Davidson and Gilbert Cranmer. The paper was a direct successor of the Messenger of Truth. Cranmer was a big thorn in the side of Ellen White. And she, of the few people that she would directly answered him. She had a direct answer for him in 1868, October Review and Herald, I think is where you'll find her response to his remarks. Test me, see if I made that up. He moved to St. Joseph, Michigan. I know well where that is. If anybody's been up to Andrews University, Berrien Springs, you've probably been in St. Joe, especially if you had rented property there and you had to have your water or gas turned on. You had to go to St. Joe to have it done. I know, because I had to go have it done. And so he was a Sabbatarian from 43 to 45 when he came to Battle Creek. And this is interesting here, because this is another Church of God historian who says he came to Battle Creek in 43 to 45, and when he came to Battle Creek, he and David Hewitt began keeping the Sabbath the same day. Does anybody know that name, Hewitt? David Hewitt. Kramer and Hewitt in Battle Creek began keeping the Sabbath the same day. He was the most honest man in town. Joseph Bates, when he came to town to Battle Creek, knowing that we were going to be there, he went ahead and began to set the stage. And he went to the post office, much like he'd done in several towns in the past. And he goes to the post office and he asks the postmaster, who is the most honest man in town? David Hewitt. If you go to the Adventist Heritage Village in Berrien Springs, Michigan, they have the little place there right by Ellen's house there on Wood Street, you'll see a little cabin that's there. Now, that's not where he lived, but they put the cabin there. It's an authentic cabin from the same period, just not his cabin, where he lived, and they tell the story of the most honest man in town, where Joseph Bates began to start the first Sabbath-keeping group there that would meet in the cabin. So that, you could say, was our first church in Battle Creek, followed then by the barn over on Wood Street by Ellen and James White's home there on Wood Street. Well, I'm not sure there's a lot of truth there. I think Kramer is taking credit for David Hewitt, work that Joseph Bates had done. Actually, the dates on there are about 5 years early, maybe more than what Hewitt was. And so I think there's a rewrite of history. Well, technically at that time, it was just a movement, and it wasn't really the Church of God yet. They didn't really organize it until 1868. They didn't have an organization until 5 years after the Seventh-Day Adventists, because they come from largely a congregational mindset. And that was the Millerite mindset coming out of that period of time. Even what would be Seventh-Day Adventists had the same kind of mind. They said as soon as you organize at once, you become Babylon. So that was the mindset. But I still think we're looking at dates 5 years, maybe up to 10 years before Bates came in and worked with David Hewitt, the most honest man in town. So there's some history there that needs to be checked. He continued working with his paper, Hope of Israel. He worked on with those who would later become Seventh-day Adventists, but was disappointed in that he never knew of any being healed. He believed in the gifts, and because there was no evidence of anybody being physically healed miraculously, he figured God wasn't with this movement. And so that really began to affect him there. And it seemed, and secondly, he says, and that the gift of prophecy seemed to be wholly confined to a woman. Now, notice he didn't say that woman. He just said to a woman. In the 1950s, you've heard of the evangelical conferences that we had with Walter Martin and Donald Barnhouse there at the conference office. An Adventist, a conservative Adventist, called and talked to Brother Donald Barnhouse about prophecy, and he had made some mention about Ellen White, and he says, Ellen White never claimed to be a prophet, the Adventist said to him. And Donald Barnhouse barks back, and he says, that's right, because God never called a woman to be a prophet. The fact that she was a woman. In fact, he said he never called that woman, was his language. And so, yeah, well, don't confuse him with the facts. So that was the problem of the day. And so we can see Kramer is already showing some of what's driving him theologically. Reasons for leaving, shut door, that's a whole sermon in itself. If anybody's interested, that's extra. Prophecy in a woman, and no revelation of the healing gifts. These things here created a dissonance in him that he became suspicious that I had gotten aboard the wrong ship. And so that was part of what he said his reason was for leaving the Adventist, the Sabbatarian, what would be Seventh-day Adventist group, and moving in with the Church of God group. On where the reasons, December 19 to 20, 1857, Ellen envisioned with Kramer there. She had never met the man before. She told him that he was afraid of family worship. And still, he used tobacco, even when he said he hadn't. He was afraid of family worship, that instead of having worship with his family in prayer like he should, he would go out to the barn and have private worship by himself, because he evidently was self-conscious in front of his family. 6 weeks later, asked James White for a license to preach. Kramer did. James asked him if he had reformed. He said no. So James said no license. And so then, what A little bit later, Kramer starts complaining the same kind of stuff he's had before about how James had refused a license because he did not believe in Mrs. White's visions. So he starts the dissidence because things aren't going his way. Later revived, the Hope of Israel was revived in Meridian, Iowa. 2 Adventist leaders, vice president and vice president of the conference, Snook and Brinkerhoff. They became known as the Meridian Party, becoming the Church of God Adventists, and the paper's name changed to the Bible Advocate. This is probably the main group that really began to move all those groups together, and they begin to coalesce. They in essence found each other where those may have scattered and coalesced into the church, what would be the Church of God. Later, revived at Meridian, Iowa by Snook and Brinkerhoff as the Meridian Party. Later became the Church of God Adventist. The paper's name changed to the Bible Advocate. Would organize first in Stanberry, Missouri, and then later Denver, Colorado. That's after the 33. Reorganization of the Church of God, Seventh-Day, the number 7, Salem, West Virginia, 1933. There they met for a conference, and there began discussion that would lead to a breakup of the church. And that's why then we had the Salem group organized almost within a day or two of the conference meeting as the Salem Seventh-Day, Church of God Seventh-Day, as seventh with a number 7 instead of spelling it out. 2 men, A. and Duger and Dodd. Duger felt that the church needed to be in Jerusalem. Dodd, sacred names were his thing since about 1930. They believed in the order, biblical order. There was a big debate over church organization because when you organize by contract, you get something with the government, a corporation going, then you become part of Babylon. And you weren't part of true church organization. And they said true church organization was what, the 12 apostles. And then they had the 70. You know where the 70 comes from, right? That's the elders of Moses. And then you had the servants, the 7, which were the deacons. But in this case, these weren't deacons. These were the financiers. These were the treasurers. These were the money handlers. But either way, they broke the church organization down into 3 groups. You had the 12, the 70, the 7. And not so much was the president who led everything as much as he was supposed to be, just simply chairman of the board. But that was the organization that they wanted to lead from. And that's actually the Salem group still holds to that form today. He would, exactly, because he was part of this group originally. And that's why I have him. He was one of the 70, and he would be disfellowshipped and begin what he called the Worldwide Church of God. And so we see it here as the Church of God Adventist, organized first in Stanberry, 1899. This was from the Hope of Israel movement in the paper. Then it was we had the problem there with the Church of God Seventh-Day Salem, would organize as a separate group after the conference there in 33. But then there was a coming back. They had the Armstrong group moved off, and then the Salem church actually came back into the Church of God when they were organized in Denver. But there was a group still that broke away, what they call the Back to Salem movement, around 1950. And so this is your basic group. You have other breakups that you can have in there, but it starts to get messy. This is the general breakdown of the Church of God. The Back to Salem group would comprise what's back at Salem, Salem, West Virginia, what's some of the independent groups that had joined with them, and some of the independent groups that are still out there might be associated with them in idea and purpose, even though they have their own thing. They wanted to maintain a congregational organization, which was what they had originally started with, and not go into regular church organization like what happened up in Denver, Colorado, with that kind of formal organization. So they reestablished headquarters, Church of God, Salem, West Virginia. It started to publish the Advocate of Truth. The Back to Salem movement broke into at least 3 factions, and that was because of Dodd and his partner there. The Salem group, original people stayed at Salem with its headquarters. Duggar and Stevenson, they went to Jerusalem, started the paper, was it the Zion Watchman, I think it's still there. And then Olson and Groshen, who formed the Seventh-Day Church of God in Caldwell, Idaho, now Meridian, Idaho, more of a congregational independent style, kind of a real earth grassroots organization. So their basic teachings, like I said, was age to come, the second chances, the kingdom here on earth. The Denver group went from an Aryan position of God to a more classic view of the Godhead, not 100% Trinitarian. A lot of times we use the word Trinitarian, and even today within Adventist circles, it can be a loaded word. I don't know if you've had experience with that. Trinitarian can be a loaded word. Yeah. You can say Trinity to a Seventh-day Adventist and almost get punched. I'm just being facetious here. Right, yeah. So there's tendency even here among us, because of our history too. We can go back to that. But Denver went to a more classic view. Salem and the other groups generally held to a more Aryan view. Jesus is a created being. And if not created, at least the first begotten somehow came from God at a different point in time. He wasn't as eternal as God the Father. Right. They held to baptism by immersion. Non-immortality of the soul, sounds familiar. Tithe. Tithe was mandatory. Fellowship. Your fellowship with the church depended on that. In fact, in some organizations actually pushed, like the Worldwide Church of God, Armstrong, pushed for the three tithes, the 30%. Yeah, first, second, third tithes. Yeah, what would go first for the work, ministers and stuff. Second was go to help fund for the feast days, because they brought in the feast days. And the third was, oh, right, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so, and that's 30% of your income. So, yeah. So that's the reason enough for me to leave, huh? No, I'm just being facetious. Well, and you know, and I'm glad you brought that up, that you were blessed. You know, first off, I want us to realize something. God blesses us in our ignorance because we're all there, right? Nobody has all truth. He knows our hearts. He answers prayer not because we have great theology. Yeah, exactly. And listen, if you were given that tithe, however it was demanded and controlled by the church, if you gave it from a cheerful heart doing God's work, God blessed you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, right. Right. So you save the second time to go to the feast every year and celebrate, but then you pay the tithe of the time of that second time. So you actually get it. Right. Yeah. I hear you. So, yes.
What was that word,
Aryan? That has to do with the Aryan concept by a theology that sees Jesus as a created being, not as equal with God.
Basically, he was a created being.
Right. They teach that Jesus was a created being. It's called Arianism. Right. Jehovah's Witnesses are Arian. And Adventism, for the most part, was Arian in its very, very beginning. Many of its people were Arian. You get the copies of Uriah Smith's Daniel and Revelation before the 1944 editions and the revisions. Well, that's the LDS, but Adventists have never taught that. It would go into an Arian idea because it would certainly make Jesus a created being. But they go further in making God a created being. LDS is the God makers. We're all capable of becoming Yahweh. Start our own planets, become creators and stuff. It's all part of a generation thing. Yeah. So it's even worse than that. At least they took the non-immortality of the soul to its natural conclusion. Not the fact that you had a beginning and lived forever, but that not only do you live forever, but you lived forever in the past. You had no beginning, you have no end. So however right or wrong it is, at least they were willing to jump on board with that. Non-combatant in military, not an optional program. That's an option in Adventism, you know that. You can be a Seventh-day Adventist and be a combatant in war and not be disfellowshipped, technically speaking. Our membership's held at a local level. If you get a very conservative church, they're liable to still do something. But technically, you should not, it's not a reason for disfellowshipping you. But in some groups it is, such as the SDA Reform we'll talk about later. It becomes a matter of fellowship. It's mandatory. You cannot participate at all. In fact, they went one step further and didn't even allow you to participate in war, even as a medic or a non-combatant. Period. So that was the SDA Reform. We'll talk about that. And that was many of the same views held here by the Church of God. Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a Messianic group. Yeah. You're not talking about Michael Rood with the big beard, Michael Rood? Oh, they're Adventist? John Vandenberg. Yeah, because I always kid at one of the guys that worked for our conference there in Arizona, Eric Vandenberg. I says, "Are you related to these people?" He would blush and say no, but we found out later he secretly was. But he just didn't want to admit it. Communion once a year, based on Passover, whether it was on the eve of Passover or on actual date, and they would fight over that, what was supposed to be observed. Jesus says, as often as you observe, Adventists have done it traditionally out of the Methodist Church once a quarter, based off the pastors out on their route would at least once a quarter have communion with their church. Not necessarily on that same part of the quarter, but maybe this week with one group, next week with another group, but at least once a quarter they try to have a communion service with their churches because they had so many churches. And of course in those days the pastors went around. They were not necessarily tied down to their churches. The elders and the people, deacons, they ran their church while the pastors were gone. So we got into the habit of having communion once a quarter, and that's why we have it once a quarter, not because it's right or wrong or that there might be a better way. I think we could have communion more, it wouldn't hurt, but we just got in the habit of doing it once a quarter. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, that's true. There are some who do, other than Adventists, but very few. Yeah, they sure do. Yeah, only once a year, but yeah, on the 14th, yeah. So, yeah. You were Baptist in Baptist Wall Street? Oh, Primitive Baptist. Oh, okay. I'm familiar with that. Yeah. So, yeah, when I was beginning to run, I met my wife and I actually took her to church. I took her to church on a Sabbath when they had communion. My wife was not raised in a church of any kind. She was friends with a lot of her Catholic friends, and she would go to Catholic Mass with them and partake of the Eucharist just because she was with her friends. But she wasn't raised in any kind of religious environment. So here she is at an Adventist church on Communion Sabbath watching people wash their feet. And then she gets over to my sister's house, and she's hearing my sister complain to her daughter, my niece, who was 15, 16 at the time, about her not being able to go out and play with her friends or whatever because it's the Sabbath. And so she's saying, oh, they wash their feet, they can't do this on Saturday, and who are these people? So she really had quite an interesting view of the Adventists. Well, naturally, I was the great communicator, so it took me another 20 years before she came into the church. More than that, actually. She came in 2004 and completely took me by surprise. it was by being invited to a meeting by one of her co-workers who was an Adventist, a friend of mine, invited her, and she came. We lost a child in '83 at birth, and Ron Halverson was giving the meetings, and she sat there listening to him preach, and he made the statement, "Let God put that baby back in your arms." You say that to a woman who's lost a child. And she remembered that, and that she said, "I never thought of never seeing him again." And that really grabbed her. You know, we talked to Carol, his wife, and she says, "Oh yeah, sometimes he uses that and sometimes he doesn't say that in that sermon." And so we went back to the recordings and the video, and it's not there. It's not there in the recording. We can't find it. But she heard him say it. And that's what struck her. And she was baptized in March of 2004. And we've been together ever since on that. So, not communion once a year. The Denver group had more of a grace-based gospel. The others, kind of the primitive Adventist-based gospel. Some of you have been around for many years. Remember back when they showed you the chart, little graph, and the line went up at a 45-degree angle? You started with justification. And of course, you couldn't do much, so you did what you did, and then God made up the rest, right? Jesus makes up the rest. But as you get better, you do more, he does less, until you get up to the top where it's just all you, right? Remember that? Anybody remember that chart? So, see, we've had some issues with that, and frankly, we have some of us in our denomination have that same problem today. A less grace-based gospel. Denver had more base grace. You had to go to the Baptist church to get it. So, and what I found disturbing as I studied apologetics and Adventists and the Adventism is I found that there was those in the Adventist church who would get the gospel. Like you said, you got a gospel from the Baptist church, the Methodist. And when they got the gospel, they would leave Adventism. I said, why? You need to stay here and share that with the others. That's been a part of my mission is when I go out and teach and preach, is to preach the gospel message. Once you have that gospel plugged into the three angels' messages, you've got power, dynamite. Dynamite. Without that, it's navel-gazing. It's see who's perfect. That's not going to bring people into the church. You tell me, what witness is going to bring people into the church? Yeah. So, that's been a part of my mission all along. So, that's the teachings there. They hold the various ways to the dietary laws. Some groups eating pork, some not. Some alcohol and tobacco, some not. And you'll find different groups with that. In the Worldwide Church of God, Herbert Armstrong was viewed as the Elijah. Within Adventism, who's the Elijah? And that, hey, this wasn't your test. We are the Elijah. Did you know that? You are Elijah. It's the three angels' messages. What was Elijah's message? Remember, standing on the mountain, Mount Carmel. He shows up with the priests and prophets of Baal. He says, how long are you going to halt between two opinions? If Yahweh be God, worship him. If Baal be God, worship him. We're going to find out who God is today. It was an issue of worship. And that's what we see in the first angel's message. First angel's message has to do with salvation, judgment, worship. And that third part says, worship him who made heaven, earth, sea, and the fountains of water. Who are you going to worship? And who gives that is we do. We give the Elijah message. We are the Elijahs. But not the person. Whereas Armstrong took that upon himself. He also saw himself as an apostle, the one who led out. Hence a prophet. The apostles were all prophets. And so he began with these various titles. We have other groups that would have the same problem, such as with Victor Houda. We'll talk about that, how he took upon himself many titles in the same type of way. He also brought in what's called the British Israel identity of the 10 lost tribes. The 10 tribes, well, first off, you've heard of the lost tribes? You know, the 10 tribes that were taken out in 722 by Sennacherib, northern kingdom of Israel. We call them the lost tribes. They're not lost. We know exactly where they are. They're spread all over there, and what would be Persia or today Iraq and Iran, over into China and India. They're spread all out through there. We know there's Jews in there, and that's them. That's the 10 tribes. The only thing we don't know is what tribe they might be part of, you know, because they've lost their genealogy. That's all. But we know where they are. They're not lost. But what was said is that these lost tribes would eventually become European, British, and Americans as they would come across the ocean and begin the nation. So we're the restoration of Israel in that sense. And this is part of the story that he brought in. It was over these main areas of the British identity and bringing in other feast days that Armstrong was disfellowshipped from the Salem group. The same holds to deliverance to Petra to escape the last day judgment. Now, that's not everybody. Some do hold to this. They want to go to Petra. And we're still not sure where Petra is, but though they seem to think they want to know where it's at, there's a couple places called Petra, and we're not even sure it's one of those. But there's where the apostles went, where the church went in Israel when it was in Jerusalem when it was being persecuted. They all went to Petra. Well, in the end, God's going to have his people go to Petra to escape the last day judgment, kind of like the rapture in a different way. Yeah. No, that's Petra, but we're not sure that's the city that they're talking about. But they think they're talking about that city. They think but there's other places that might be Petra. There's more than one place called Petra. And what's interesting here with this whole concept of God having to take us away to protect us is this concept of last plague thing. And I've done a series on Revelation, and when I get to the last plagues, which have bugged me for decades, I preach a sermon that I call, where I can preach on the 7 last plagues and make you feel good about it. And as I begin to understand, you know, we think about how God's going to hold his hand over us during the plagues and protect us. I come to realize he doesn't have to do that. Because when you look at the plagues and begin to analyze it, the plagues to us, covenant people, aren't plagues at all. But they are to those who are in rebellion, who are not part of the covenant. So it's not like God has to cover us. It's when God shows up, Isaiah talks about it, I think it's chapter 28, living in the everlasting burnings. Jesus shows up. Either it's going to kill you, or it's going to be your life. And I think when I see the story, so, you know, this is some of the things I've studied out as I was beginning to look at the 7 last plagues, because I found Brother Smith had very little to say about it. He only had 2 conclusions. Post-close of probation, and they were literal. That's all he ever said about them. And Ellen White says actually less. She says less than that. So we have less on that. And what we have is speculation about the 7 last plagues. Yeah, and a lot of it's on the trumpets too. Ellen White said very little about the trumpets. Hardly anything at all. So we get into the same problems here. Of course, feast days. He was bringing all those back. Obedience in order to be saved. He brought out certain things that you had to do in order to be members of the kingdom, which was a works-based approach. And you had the 3 resurrections, one being a group that's able to accept Christ. You familiar with that? That's Worldwide Church of God, yeah. So this is your general church, though, is in Denver, Colorado. We know about the Worldwide Church of God that broke up circa 2000 when they went back to Sunday worship. Was it 95? I thought it was. Okay. Okay. Right. Yeah. 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 There was I understand, about 70,000 members or so in the whole Worldwide Church of God, and when it broke up, about half of them left, and there was virtually all home churches. Okay. Okay. There you go. So he had a place for you, all set out. And so there you can share this. So when you have any dissonant movement come in, you're a great asset to bring in. Even if you don't know what that particular dissonant movement is, you know what's happening. You know the mindset behind stuff. And you can be a help to your brothers and sisters. At least, and when I talk about these groups, such as even the Church of God and the Davidians or whoever, I'm not ever going to tell you not to study them. I'm not going to tell you to stay away. You tell me not to study something, I'm going to go check it out. Tell me not to study it. No, but at least you got your eyes open. They're not coming in, pulling the rug out from under you, sneaking around, making you think one thing when in fact something else is happening. At least you're going in with your eyes open. And when your eyes are open, you begin to see things. So there's not a problem. Not a problem studying. You want to find out about them? You can go on the internet, find out all kinds of things. Some of it true, some of it not so true. But all kinds of stuff is there. So it's there for us to find.